Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar and interim rector here, and whether you're joining us in person on Park Avenue or online at stbarts.org, it's a delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And this morning, we are honored to have with us Stephen Post, who's the author of the new book just released this week, I believe, Pure Unlimited Love, Science, and the 7 Paths to Inner Peace. It will be available for purchase here after the forum. If you're here in person, it's obviously available. If you're joining us online, in all the normal outlets. Stephen is the director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at the Renaissance School of Medicine at Stony Brook University. He is also co-founder of the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. Thank you so much, Stephen, for being here.
Peter, it is a delight and an honor. I love this place. I love the people here, and I grew up with Charlie Scribner.
Yes, who was wonderful enough to set this conversation up.
And I thank him from a distance.
Yes. Hello, Charlie. Before we start talking about the book, Stephen, I wonder if you can talk about what you do professionally. You have these 2 big, long titles, and I wonder if you can talk about what you do and what got you to this point in your career.
Well, in terms of Stony Brook, they wanted someone who would teach students and physicians not just ethics, quandaries. Do you use a feeding peg for someone who's 92 and deteriorating quickly with Alzheimer's? That's a quandary. But they wanted someone who could really create an active and innovative program on compassionate care, because ultimately that's what people miss the most. They want their doctors to approach them with presence and heart, and not just cognitive empathy, reflecting back what you said, but also the sort of deeper thing that is so meaningful, the emotional empathy, basically. And so we do great stuff. We're ranked 7th in the country, and we're the first program to focus in on compassionate care and empathy and different techniques of teaching that. So I love doing it. I go to work every day with a lot of happiness, and it's very consistent with pure unlimited love. So and I've been in medical schools for, I guess, 40 years. I started at the University of Chicago. And then I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which I loved. And then I was at Case Medical School in Cleveland for 20 years. And I've been at Stony Brook for, 16 years. That's a long time. But I've never really given myself much of a break. And my day job is always related to the deeper reality of the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, which is your other area of query. And that's something that Sir John Templeton started with me. So in the year 2000, I was sitting in my office at Case Med School. I actually had a genetics grant for Alzheimer's disease from the NIH at the time. And Sir John, who was getting up in years, he's passed away now, Sir John did not like the idea of email. It was just a little too much for him. But he loved the fax machine. He thought the fax machine was the greatest thing ever invented. And he would fax me a couple of important things every day, and I had to respond because, that's Sir John. And one morning he faxed me and he said, "Stephen, we need to start a research center to study the greatest human and divine asset, which he referred to as pure unlimited love." And I wondered about it. I have to confess, if I might, I had a moment of slight trepidation, because this is a very aridly secular scientific environment. And when you take these things on, you're going to have to be a little bit mirthful. So serious but mirthful, because otherwise people will think you're completely out of your mind. So I faxed back, "Sir John, this is a great idea. What should we call it?" And he said, "The Institute for Research on Unlimited Love." And I faxed back, I said, "Maybe we could play with that a little bit and call it the Institute for Research on Creative Altruism," because there was a great sociologist at Harvard named Pitram Sorokin, who I met when I was a kid. And he had a center for creative altruism there. And he was great. So Sir John faxed back, "No, Stephen, I think Pure unlimited love, up to $8.9 million. And I think I did what a lot of you would have done. I faxed back immediately, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. And we were off and running. And we funded probably 60 to 70 important studies around the country, in Canada, sometimes in Europe, and been a part of the breakthrough to the positive psychology movement. I worked a lot with Marty Seligman in developing positive psychology, although he is the father of positive psychology. But now even in the medical schools, people are studying kindness, awe, talk about awe in a beautiful building, wonder, forgiveness, kindness. And so it all comes together, and I'm very happy. I've been very blessed in my life. I did go to the University of Chicago Div School and wrote a dissertation on the topic of Christian love, but also did a lot of psychology with Chick Sent Me High. Don't try to say that. When he was writing Flow. So we were close friends. And he did a lot of teaching in the Div School with the world religions people, because when you're in the state of flow, you are somewhat beyond time and place. And that's a very spiritual zone. So I've just been very happy. I've got a wonderful wife of 43 years, 2 great kids, both of whom are grown up, and I think kind. You know, there's a chapter in this book, May You Raise Kind Children. Somehow they're kind. You got to hope for that, because that's what you really want. I guess that is what success is. And so that's me. That's what I do. I've been pretty busy. Went to St. Paul's with Charlie, and met his father, who would come up there and talk about some of the great authors for Scribner's. It was beautiful, you know, for everyone from Churchill to you name it. It was unbelievable. And another guy up there, Ned Perkins, his grandfather, Malcolm Perkins, was the editor for F. Scott Fitzgerald, very quite famous, the discoverer of F. Scott Fitzgerald. So we had a lot of deep talks about literature, and Charlie is, you know, heads over heels, brighter than I am, and a wonderful human being, and he's had a great life.
So you're now an author yourself many times over. Do you want to talk about what led you to write this book? You've been studying unlimited love for this long. Why write the book on it now?
So I go from something that's medical to something that's more general and spiritual. This is more general and spiritual. But this was this is for you too. This is my earlier book from 2 years ago with Johns Hopkins Press, called Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People. So I spent a lot of my time doing neuropalliative care and working with people who have dementia secondary to Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and you name it. That's for you, okay? And that actually got a Book of the Year award from Hopkins, which is nice. It's more of an academic thing. This is much less academic. It's much more casual. And I love public writing. But I'll probably, you know, next time around go back to something that's a little more in the medical domain. And then hopefully, if time permits, I'll do something more in the spiritual, theological domain. But, you know, I love writing. I have to be very careful to do it well. I need lots of editors. Editors are very helpful, like Fiona, who's with Morehouse Publications. I've been fortunate to work with some great people.
You talk about the 7 paths in the subtitle, and that's how the book is structured. Do you want to tell me how you got to those 7 paths and why you chose to write about these particular avenues to love?
These are the things, it's a very important question. These are the things that have just meant the most to me in my life. I'm not saying that there are not other paths, but these are the paths that we've studied a lot. So for example, there's a path, May You Raise a Kind Child. So with the Institute, we put $4 million into studying the how-tos of raising a kind child with some of the best researchers in that field. So everything has been amply studied and considered. We've had conferences on all these paths. So they happen to be the things that have attracted me and which I don't think have been overdone. So the first one, it kind of reads like a mantra. May you give and glow.
We're currently in the middle of our pledge campaign, so this is perfect.
May you give kindly and glow. So there's nothing like kind giving. And I started working on that 25 years ago, and it published in the New England Journal, JAMA, lots of different places. It turns out that when you give and glow, you feel better about your life. You have more of a sense of happiness. I was happy when I came to Stony Brook, and this is now 16 years ago, and I got a call from United Health, the insurer. And I've been writing about this for a while, and they wanted to know, is it really true? So we did a national survey of adults, 18 and older, who had volunteered. We asked them, had you volunteered in 2009? And many of them had. Actually, 42% of adults volunteered in 2009. And we're asking them this now in the beginning of 2010. And then we asked them positive psychology questions about what their volunteering meant to them. So 73% lowered my stress levels. That's not bad. 89% improved my sense of well-being. 92% felt an enriched sense of purpose in life. 68% volunteering made me feel physically healthier. A couple more here. 77% volunteering improves my emotional health. 78% volunteering helps with recovery from loss and disappointment. And it goes on. So, you know, if you could package that in a pill, you'd be a billionaire overnight, because it really works, not like some of these medications, I'm afraid to say. And I think that's beautiful. So I actually, with my colleagues, did an article about widows and widowers in New York who had been, importantly, happily married for many years, and now they've lost their loved ones. So they go typically through a period of grief and bereavement. And we asked them, so did you volunteer formally, or were you just helping others during that period, and what did it mean to you? Turns out that the ones who could report, self-report, helping activities were getting through this process of grief and bereavement more quickly, and also in a more enduring fashion. So this organization in New York, the New York Society of Widows and Widowers, there is such a thing, they were having their annual meeting at one of the hotels not too many blocks from here. And they invited me in to do a plenary. And I gave this talk, and I was emphasizing all the internal, it's not transactional. You know, it's not tit for tat. It's just the internal benefits of getting away from the self and the problems of the self and contributing meaningfully to the lives of others. As the Bible says, God loves a cheerful giver. And it went really well, I thought, until at the end we had Q&A. And there was a guy in the back of the room who was frantically waving his hands. And I called on him. I said, "Sir, may I help you?" And he said, "Yeah. I don't do nothing for nothing," quote unquote. And I said, "Are you happy?" And he said, "No, I'm not very happy. I've never been very happy." And so we talked this through for a while, and he determined that by the end of the week, he was going to start doing things more freely for other people. I don't do nothing for nothing. That's not necessarily a New York expression, by the way. New Yorkers are very generous. It's just that they don't necessarily trust the people around them. We did a study on that. It's a beautiful thing. And there's so much to be said about giving and glowing, and it's become a very popular title. So the first book I did on this topic was May Good Things Happen to Good People, how to live a longer, healthier, happier life through the simple act of giving. And I've never left that theme terribly much. It's always been close to my heart.
I'm not sure we'll have time to talk about all 7 paths, but I know that you're doing work on the 6th path right now, May You Cherish the Gift of Nature. Do you want to talk about the importance of that path and the work that you're doing beyond the book?
Yeah, so, you know, I go to the psychiatric emergency room periodically, not for myself, but just to sort of observe what's going on with people. And I gotta tell you, there is just so much anxiety, it's just unbelievable. And I feel that a lot of it has to do with people being really quite separated from nature. So my department, my center, hired the first medical physician documentary historian on well-being and health. Her name is Delaney Rustin. She's now out with the Gates Foundation. And she did a beautiful documentary called Screenagers. Did anyone ever hear of that, Screenagers? It's been around, it's been very successful. And it's really frank conversations with families about how parents try to manage the screen addictions in their kids. And it can get very difficult. I mean, you read some horror stories, and most of them are true. Even with AI, one of my friends is at UC San Francisco, a psychiatrist. You can Google this, and he coined the expression AI psychosis. So there are now, I think, 8 individuals who have killed themselves through AI. And it's not that they had a history of depression, which is really very amazing. No great history of depression. They may have had some moments of it, but not much. But they're just caught up with all of the back and forth with an entity that does not have that sort of empathic, emotional quality. It has cognitive empathy. It can feed back. You can go to those websites and you can say, hi, something's bothering me, and they will respond, what's bothering you the most? And you'll say, well, I lost my dog, or whatever it might be. But then there's not a shred of kindness that comes through on that. So sometimes the AI devices are walking people through a process that leads them to their own self-destruction. There was an article in the New York Post, for those of you who read that. I read it for the sports section, I'll say. But I always have. I remember the Knicks of Walt Frazier and all of those things. These events are really quite horrific. And this is one fellow who worked in finance, and he was spending hours and hours and hours on AI every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. And he killed his mother, and then he killed himself. So we have to be very careful about the power of these technologies. And there's a side to me that just wants to get off the grid. I like the Poconos.
And being back in nature is a kind of remedy to the excessive technology.
Yeah, nature is an amazing remedy. And by the way, you know who designed Central Park? Huh? Yeah, Fred Olmsted. Do you know where he lived the last 5 years of his life? You can Google this, at McLean Asylum in Boston. And he lived there as a patient. And he had what they would have called back then schizoid affective disorder. They didn't use the term schizophrenia. And he put most of the finishing touches on Central Park from McLean Hospital. And before he died, he said, I hope that New Yorkers, for hundreds of years, will get a tremendous amount of benefit by walking through Central Park and seeing the natural beauty, the awe, the wonder, the majesty of it. Because he said, that's something that's meant so much to me in my own recovery. He actually designed the 6 sister asylums on the East Coast: Philadelphia, the Institute for Living in Connecticut, McLean itself. He did a lot of the design on that with sweeping 300-acre fields and beautiful trees. And he just believed that there was something amazingly healing about nature. So what I do is I get on the ferry from Port Jefferson to Bridgeport. I get round-trip tickets. This is about every month or two. And I just enjoy the waves. And I love to see the seagulls and just be out there. And it's such a wonderful healing experience. So it's nice to remember that Central Park was designed and in many respects created by a guy who knew that he needed that to be well, to be healthy.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the spirituality that underlies unlimited love and your work on it. You do talk about the influence of clergy people, you quote from the Bible, but you also characterize unlimited love in very kind of general, abstract terms. And I wonder, as someone who has a lot of grounding in Christianity, what led you to make those decisions?
Well, I'm a card-carrying Episcopalian, just FYI. And I believe in the Eucharist, and I'm going to go to church here at 11 o'clock. But I've always been somewhat wide-ranging in my thinking. I mean, at Chicago, I studied world religions.
And there are tons of world religions all over the book.
Tons of world religions, and you have to try to sort them out. 10 years ago, I went to Bangalore in India, where they have the Indian Institute for Advanced Studies. And as I said earlier, I do a lot of work with deeply forgetful people. I don't like the word dementia. I don't use it. We've had National Gallup surveys, and half of the primary caregivers in America have stopped using the word dementia because it invites derogatory metaphors: husk, shell, empty, gone, dead, and so forth. And I'm interested in positive psychology. We have a big movement with a large group out of Massachusetts and the Harvard-related hospitals. We're figuring out how to apply positive psychology to people who are deeply forgetful. They can still experience mirth, and they can still appreciate kindness. They can still appreciate beauty. They can be very creative. Their symbolic rationality is never gone. So even to the very end, they can identify, as de Kooning did. De Kooning was diagnosed at Cornell. His earlier work was full of anxiety and energy, and when he became deeply forgetful, it all changed, and he started to paint like Georgia O'Keeffe, and they had a posthumous exhibit of his work. A lot of the reviewers said he's a shell of his former self. The one I like from the New Yorker said, wait a minute, here's a guy who had a diagnosis of probable Alzheimer's disease for the last 14 years of his life, and for 13 and a half years, he knew who he was. He was a painter. And he's still dressed in dungarees. They had to change them. They had a bunch of pairs with paint stains on it, which he could identify with. And he would dip his brush sporadically in the acrylic and go up to the easel, and he would paint these beautiful things. And they were, I would say, they represented spiritual growth, because it wasn't just anxiety, the age of anxiety. It was much more about kindness and generosity and the beauty of creation. I can't swear to that, but it's what I get from his work. So for sure, we need to take that kind of experience seriously and not just diminish the value of these individuals. What was your question?
On the spiritual grounding.
Yeah. So I actually write a lot in the Hopkins book about the spiritual grounding of mind. And Sir John Templeton and I were very close. He was Presbyterian, but kind of Presbyterian. He really loved the Asian traditions. They called him, by the way, the Tennessee Mystic. That was his nickname. And we had wonderful conversations. In fact, the first time I met him, which was in a conference center near Dulles Airport, we just sat down, we talked for 3 hours about the nature of mind. And he didn't think, as I don't think, he didn't think that anybody really has their own mind. Sorry. He was much more Hindu than that. So when I was at the University of Chicago, I studied with Sir John Eccles. Sir John Eccles won, the other Sir John, won the Nobel Prize for figuring out all the basics that we know about the interrelationships between neurons, how they communicate and so forth. And he said, don't ever think of the brain as the source or the origin of mind. He said there's no proof for that. There's no substantive argument to defend it. Mind is something much larger than that, much more transformational, much more universal. It uses the brain as its platform, if you will. But the brain is not where we derive mind from. And so I was giving a talk at the Indian Institute for Advanced Studies on how I think that we can never tell people in families who are caring for the folks who are deeply forgetful that grandma is gone or grandpa is gone, that they're no longer there. So I was talking about this, and then I said what's more important than linear rationality, means ends rationality, how to get from point A to point B, is symbolic rationality and consciousness. And so there was a little ruffling in the back of the room, and it was His Holiness the Dalai Lama who wrote the foreword to the Love Book. And he put his hand down on the table and he said, "You're right, Stephen, there's no reason to think less of someone because they are deeply forgetful." And I believe that fully with my entire heart. My grandmother died of probable Alzheimer's disease, and I would go visit her in a nursing home and do assisted oral feeding. That was when they were wise enough not to use feeding pegs, by the way. And sometimes I wouldn't get anything from her except a feeling of presence. And lo and behold, in a moment of unexpected lucidity, she would call out my name and say, "Stevie, I love you." And so that's there. And you may or may not know of this great African-American Baptist minister, Pastor Otis Moss. Really famous guy. And
he wrote a blurb on the back of your book.
Yeah. He's incredible. He was the chairman of the board of Morehouse College, different from the press, by the way. And I called him about 3 years ago because one of his relatives was struggling and really in the process of dying with Alzheimer's disease. And I asked him, I said, "Pastor Moss, do you think she's still there?" And he paused, a typical Morehouse pause. And then he said, "It would be so arrogant to make that claim." He said, "What I really think is that she's already gone down to the Amtrak station and she's got one foot on that blessed train for glory." So maybe they're ahead of us. And I've known people with dementia who have gotten deeply spiritual. For those of you who are into New Testament theology, Leander Keck, Yale's great theologian of the New Testament, now passed away. His wife Janet was diagnosed with dementia, and no one could really communicate with her, but she was still there. This is the mind that I'm talking about. It may be opaque, but it's still there. So she would go to the Yale Chapel on Sundays, and when she would hear the familiar hymns that she knew as a girl, when she would hear the prayers that she knew growing up, when she would see the color through the stained glass windows, not that they have too many of them up there because it's so
Puritan.
Yeah, it's so Puritan, yeah. But she would come back into herself, and she would be able to talk with people for 5 or 10 minutes, and it was a beautiful thing. And so people began to realize that even though she's more difficult to find, underneath it all, there she is. And that's what I mean by one mind. I believe that we all participate in this one mind. We never really can divorce ourselves from it. And this is the majority opinion in the world. And most philosophers of mind, more than 50% of them, including the best ones in the country who are at NYU, they all accept this position. They think there's no way that you can prove that mind is derived from brain, any more than you can say that you get blood out of a stone. It's just metaphysically, ontologically different.
So we have just a few minutes for your questions. If you're here in the building, I think Judy Miller has question cards. Just raise your hand, she'll come around to you. You can fill one out and she'll bring them back up. If you're joining us online, you can type your questions into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. While we're waiting for those questions to come in the book, in addition to the paths, you also have the wheel. The 10 forms of pure unlimited love: celebration, compassionate care, forgiveness, attentive listening, carefrontation, helpfulness, loyalty, respect, mirth, and creativity. Can you talk about the wheel and why it's important?
Yeah, briefly. It's so important because, honestly speaking, if I go into my workplace every day and I'm talking about love, quote unquote, I'm going to lose a lot of people. They won't necessarily fire me, but they'll wonder. But nobody has problems with the major expressions of love. And that's what this book focuses on. So every chapter takes up these expressions of love in one of the various pathways. And those are, as you mentioned, carefrontation, which I got permission to use from M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled. Scotty had gone to medical school at Case Western before I ever got there, but we corresponded a great deal. He was living in Connecticut, and he wrote me and he said, you know, with all your writing on love, you need something that's a little tougher. But we didn't like the language of tough love. We didn't like the language of confrontation. And he was a psychiatrist, of course. So he said, how about carefrontation? And he pointed out that he used that in The Road Less Traveled. So that's part of this book with permission from the original source.
Mm-hmm. So someone writes, not a question, but I hope it elicits a comment. People with cognitive loss are not simply forgetful. Some have changes in personality and lack capacity for self-care. But thank you for reminding us that they may still appreciate beauty and mirth.
Sure, it's very complicated. There are many elements to it. But still, listen, I mean, I had a very, very close friend who passed away 7 years ago in Cleveland. And he was totally incommunicado. And I went to visit him the afternoon before the morning when he died. And he could not respond to anything I said. And I was speaking carefully. You never use open-ended questions. What would you like for breakfast? You can say, would you like ham and eggs or Cheerios? Because you always have to use language. There are whole books written about this, to cue people, to remind them of wordings, because they've lost a lot of that. He was the funniest. He was an Irish neurologist. And he told me so many wonderful, clean, tasteful, uplifting jokes. You'll be happy to know. And I couldn't get through to him. So I started asking him some of the jokes that he had taught me over the years, walking the streets of Cleveland. So I asked him, so Joe, what's the Irish definition of hospitality? He couldn't respond. And I said, Joe, you know, it's when you make someone feel perfectly at home while you'd be a wishing they were. And suddenly he cracked up laughing. And then I asked him, so Joe, why shouldn't an Irishman invite an English or tell a joke to an Englishman on a Saturday night? No offense to anybody. My father was very British, by the way. My mother was very Irish. I said, it's because the Englishman might crack up laughing in church the next day. And he just broke out laughing. So even though he was not at his best, he still had within himself this sense of mirth. And mirth is so important because, you know, I mean, Norman Cousins, the great New Yorker who started the Laughter Institute at UCLA, you can heal people with laughter. You can turn them around in a millisecond, and it's very important. So I love mirth, and I think that it's something we need to practice because somehow or another we've forgotten how to laugh.
Someone wonders, you talked about the one mind. Are mind and spirit linked? Would you see spirit as something separate from the mind?
Well, so Sir John, and for all of the Hindus in the world, mind, spirit, and supreme being are different ways of talking about exactly the same thing. So if you read the Upanishads, there are 3 features to the original supreme being or the original mind. Creativity, love, and freedom. Those are the big 3. And the universe is brought into existence so there can be creatures who also manifest those 3 elements. So if you are loving, free, and creative, you're doing pretty well. I'm very much involved with Hindu theology, doesn't make me a non-Christian, but I learn a lot from it. And that's the deal, what is God? I mean, God is the original mind that precedes all, and you can't even talk about precede because it implies time, but the original being from which everything else comes.
You talk a lot in the book about meditation, and I'm wondering if you can speak a little more about meditation and its role in these 7 paths.
Yeah, so I pray and meditate every morning, and I have since I was 15 years of age up in New Hampshire. Charlie knows this. And I spent a lot of time on the paths, the beautiful wooded paths around St. Paul's, reading world scriptures. That was my favorite pastime. I didn't play ice hockey, although I appreciate the good hockey players up there. So for me, the thing about practice is to do it regularly. So the ancient rabbis, the mystical rabbis, always said when you pray and meditate, the Kabbalistic rabbis, do it early in the morning. Because when you get out of bed, and this is in their writings, when you get out of bed in the morning, you don't have that much of a sense of time. You know what I mean? I mean, you have to, what time is it, right?
You have to orient yourself.
Yeah, you have to orient yourself. And also, you don't have much of a sense of where you are. I could be in Cleveland, I could be on Long Island. It doesn't really make much difference to me. I just don't have much of a sense of place or time. And the Kabbalistic rabbis said, that's the nature of the divinity, beyond time and place. And so therefore, if you can, early in the morning, rise into meditation and prayer, you can be closer to that ultimate reality. So I pray, I meditate for half an hour, and I do a very practical thing. I envision all the people I know I'm going to see, because I run a center and direct a division of medicine and society and so forth. So I'm very busy, and I have a lot of repeated interactions over the weeks and months, and I kind of know where people are at. Maybe someone's son has relapsed into an addiction. Maybe someone's feeling the disloyalty of human nature because their partner just left them. It could be a lot of different things. But I reflect on where they're at, and I come into work, again, not spewing forth the word love, but just thinking, how can I manifest love in a practical form that makes sense for the well-being of these individuals? And that's what the meditation is all about. So my life of love is really a life of leadership when I've had that kind of role in a very practical way.
Are there individuals who embody for you pure, unlimited love? Famous people or not so famous?
Okay, so my opinion is, exception being Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. I think that some individuals come close in certain areas, like Gandhi. But nobody's high in all levels. I mean, I'm not that optimistic about human love. I'm sorry, read the papers.
Someone who spent over 2 decades studying it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, even parental love, which is a pretty deep thing, it can be very unwise. You can overindulge your kids, and they can turn out to be unkind. There's a chapter on raising kind children. I talk about this. So, you need to set the right standards. You need to do the right things, and you need to turn the attention of your kids not just toward the nearest and the dearest, although that's important, but toward the neediest and toward all humanity. So there has to be at least a leaning outwards toward the whole of humanity and of nature too. His Holiness once took me to task for being too Western in thinking about love of God and love of neighbor and love of self. What about love of nature? And hence there's a lot on the love of nature in this book. And we're having a big conference at Oxford in June with people from Oxford and Cambridge on the importance of the love of nature. So that to me is key. We are not necessarily wise in our love. We are myopic, oftentimes myopic as could be. We're also sporadic, sort of love comes and goes, and it reverses itself easily. So we're not as scream-free as we should be. And it's a long list that I could continue on with, but human love has its limits. And that's why you notice in the book, I quote W.H. Auden. Actually, can I read one thing?
Yeah.
So this is, he's my...
It'll have to be the last thing.
Last thing. He's my favorite poet of all poets. And he had a group that followed him around Oxford. He didn't teach at Oxford, but he taught at one of the prep schools about an hour north of Oxford, and they funneled into Oxford as students too. So here he is. Listen to this. This is the great poet. And he was not a practicing Anglican when he wrote this. He became a practicing Anglican, you'll be happy to know.
When he was here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. One fine night in June 1933, I was sitting on a lawn after dinner with 3 colleagues, 2 women and 1 man. We liked each other well enough, but were certainly not intimate friends, nor had any of us a sexual interest in another. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when quite suddenly and unexpectedly something happened. I felt myself invaded. Here's a metaphor. I felt myself invaded by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly, because thanks to the power I was doing it, what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. I was also certain that, though the conversation continued to be perfectly ordinary, that my 3 colleagues were having the same experience. In the case of one of them, I was able to confirm this. Key passage. And last, my personal feelings toward them were unchanged. They were still colleagues, not intimate friends. But I felt their existence as themselves to be of infinite value, and I rejoiced in it. So this was not just a human experience. And, I would talk about my favorite artist, but I won't because we don't have time, but Marc Chagall, who ran away from home when he was 17, went to St. Petersburg because his father insisted that he take over the family business of pickling herring in a small Russian town. He thought he had bigger destinies. So he sketched on the streets of St. Petersburg, and in his book written 10 years later called My Life, he talks about how he's sleeping in an alley on a mattress, and he's looking up into the sky, and he sees this beautiful bright blue descending, and he thinks it's an angel. And he wakes up, and for the rest of his life, he said that blue is the color of love. He went out and he did his first big painting, The Apparition, which is of blue and white angelic figures. He also, if you go to the UN windows, if you go to the Art Institute in Chicago, if you go to the Good Samaritan window in Poughkeepsie, behind Terrytown in Peconico Hills. Even when he died, he was in his studio outside of Paris, and he was painting a blue angel. And Picasso loved Chagall. By the way, the extra L that he added to his name when he had that experience, it means with great strides. I won't go into that, but he felt his whole life had changed. So there's a lot of people who are very creative in life, poets, artists, musicians, and they have these experiences, and they don't feel that they come from them, but they're gifts through them to humanity. I'll end up there.
Please join me in thanking Stephen Post.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Pleasure.
A reminder that Pure Unlimited Love is available for purchase. Curry is in the back with copies. And if you're nice to Stephen, I'm sure he'll sign one for you. Stephen, it's been great to have you here and great to have all of you here. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship either in person or online at 11 a.m.
I'll be there. Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was fun.
Appreciate it.
That was great.
Sorry, I have to multitask.
Yeah, you got to run. You've got to run.
Yeah. but I'll see you after church.
Say that last little thing you read, that little paragraph, Wardens, not only is it typed up on my wall,
Is it?
it is in my old wallet. I read it in class. It has meant more to me. Well, it's one of those conversion moments, pre-conversion.
If I get the mic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's a beautiful, beautiful passage. I'm glad someone else appreciates it.
Oh my God! I mean, it's right above my desk. So, anyway.
Where do you teach?
I